They'd expected a name, maybe a rank, something formal that fit neatly into their database of known operatives. Instead, what they encountered was a presence that didn't align with any file, any briefing, or any psychological profile they had studied. She stood there, without insignia, without visible weapons, her posture relaxed yet impossibly alert, like someone who didn't need permission to be dangerous. The men around her were veterans of classified missions, operators who had faced ambushes, night raids, and extraction failures. Yet something about her unsettled them in a way they couldn't explain. It wasn't fear in the traditional sense. It was recognition, an instinctive awareness that they were standing in the shadow of someone far above their clearance level. Her reputation had traveled without her. Whispers moved faster than helicopters in their world, and over the years, fragments of stories had circulated through locked rooms and encrypted channels. Entire operations altered course because of a single unidentified asset, targets neutralized without contact reports, compounds emptied overnight with no signs of forced entry. No one ever confirmed the source, but the pattern was consistent. When things went impossibly quiet, when chaos resolved itself before boots touched the ground, the same unspoken name hovered in the background like a ghost no one dared to summon. What made her legendary wasn't brute force or theatrical violence. It was precision so clean it erased evidence of effort. She operated alone not because she lacked support, but because support slowed her down. She didn't chase recognition, she erased herself from outcomes. Commanders took credit, teams received commendations, strategies were rewritten as successful adaptations. But somewhere in the classified margins of those victories was an anomaly analysts could never fully explain. That anomaly was her. When Special Ops finally asked for her call sign, it wasn't protocol, it was curiosity mixed with disbelief. They needed confirmation that she was real, that she wasn't just a myth used to scare recruits or explain impossible successes. For a brief moment, the air felt heavier, as if the world itself paused to listen. She didn't straighten or change expression. She didn't look proud or defensive. She leaned in just enough for only the closest to hear, and whispered two words that carried years of unfinished missions and silent aftermaths. Those words didn't introduce her. They reminded them. Dark Angel wasn't a name chosen for intimidation. It was a designation earned through outcomes no one could publicly acknowledge. It spoke of mercy denied to threats, of protection delivered without gratitude, of choices made in darkness so others could sleep unaware. It suggested a figure who moved between life and death without belonging to either, answering to no flag but the mission itself. In that moment, they understood why no official record held her full profile. Legends like her weren't cataloged, they were contained, released only when the world tilted too close to disaster. And before anyone could ask another question, before command could issue orders or confirmations, she stepped back, blending into the controlled chaos of the base. By the time they turned, she was gone, leaving behind nothing but silence, certainty, and the uneasy knowledge that the most dangerous ally they had would never need to announce herself again. The environment she moved through was not a battlefield in the traditional sense, but a layered maze of restricted zones, surveillance systems, and silent expectations. This was the world of elite military operations, where every step was monitored, every word recorded, and every decision carried consequences that rippled far beyond the immediate mission. The presence of Special Ops alone signaled that what was at stake was not territory or pride, but stability itself. These were operations designed to prevent headlines, not create them, and failure was measured in political fallout as much as body counts. In this world, time was the most valuable currency. Decisions were made in seconds, but their effects could last decades. Operators trained their entire lives for moments when instinct replaced conscious thought, when hesitation meant exposure and exposure meant death. Yet even among these individuals there was an unspoken hierarchy defined not by rank but by experience in the darkest corners of conflict. She existed beyond that hierarchy. While others trained for worst-case scenarios, she had already lived them and survived without witnesses.
The stakes surrounding her involvement were never openly discussed, but they were understood. If she was present, it meant conventional solutions had failed or were deemed insufficient. Her deployment implied that diplomacy had reached its limits, intelligence had hit a dead end, and escalation was no longer an option. She was not the first move, nor even the last resort. She was what came after options ran out, but before total collapse. Her role was to restore balance without tipping the scales further. Every operation connected to her carried layers of secrecy that even special ops rarely encountered. Briefings were shorter, objectives narrower, and contingencies deliberately vague. Teams were told only what they needed to know, and sometimes not even that. The assumption was simple. If she was involved, outcomes would change in unpredictable ways, but they would change in their favor. The uncertainty wasn't a weakness, it was a strategic advantage. The pressure on the environment intensified whenever she appeared. Command centers grew quieter, voices dropped, and even seasoned leaders chose their words carefully. Not out of fear of reprimand, but out of respect for someone whose decisions operated on a level beyond their own authority. Satellites adjusted orbits, drones were rerouted, and entire airspaces went dark. Not because regulations demanded it, but because someone had learned long ago that her methods worked best when left undisturbed. What defined the high stakes was not just the enemy she faced, but the consequences of exposure. If she failed, it wouldn't just be a mission lost, it would be the revelation of systems meant to remain invisible. Her success preserved illusions of control, of preparedness, of order. Her failure would expose how fragile those illusions truly were. And so the elite military setting around her was not merely a backdrop, but a living organism reacting to her presence. Protocols bent, rules softened, and assumptions were quietly rewritten. In a world where special ops represented the sharpest edge of human capability, she was the point beyond the blade, where precision met necessity, and where the cost of failure was too great to be spoken aloud. In their world, a call sign was never just a label. It was a summary of survival, a compressed history of decisions made under fire and moments that changed the trajectory of entire missions. Some call signs were given in jest, others in recognition of a single defining act, but the rarest ones were spoken with caution because they carried weight beyond explanation. When the question of her call sign surfaced, it wasn't a routine exchange. It was an invitation to reveal a truth most of them weren't sure they wanted confirmed. The room had been loud with background activity only seconds earlier. Keyboards tapping, radios murmuring, boots moving with purpose. The moment the question was asked, those sounds faded into irrelevance. It wasn't that anyone ordered silence, it arrived naturally, as if everyone sensed they were standing on the edge of something significant. She didn't respond immediately. That pause alone communicated more than any speech could have. It suggested control, not uncertainty. She was deciding how much of herself to allow into their world.
When she finally spoke, it wasn't meant for the room. It was meant for those who knew enough to understand. The words were quiet, almost intimate, forcing the listener to lean in, to commit to hearing them. In that whisper was a history of classified reports, redacted names, and operations that officially never happened. Dark Angel was not announced, it was entrusted. For those who recognized it, the effect was immediate. Eyes shifted, shoulders stiffened, and expressions changed in ways training couldn't suppress. The call sign connected dots they had spent years keeping separate. Missions that ended too cleanly, threats that vanished without escalation, assets compromised only to be miraculously recovered. The call sign wasn't dramatic, it was explanatory. It made sense of the impossible. What gave the moment its power was not the name itself, but the restraint with which it was delivered. There was no attempt to intimidate, no demand for acknowledgement. She didn't need their reaction to validate her identity. The whisper acted as a filter, separating those who belonged in that knowledge from those who did not. If you knew, you understood the significance instantly.
If you didn't, the name sounded like nothing more than a code name among hundreds. In elite circles, revelation is risk. Every detail shared becomes a potential weakness. By offering her call sign, even in a whisper, she allowed a sliver of vulnerability. Not emotional, but operational. It was a calculated move, signaling trust or necessity, perhaps both. It told them she was not there by accident and not subject to their command structure. She was an asset that existed parallel to their authority, not beneath it. That single moment redefined the dynamic in the room. Questions they had prepared no longer felt appropriate. Procedures seemed suddenly inadequate. The call sign had done its job. It reframed her not as a participant, but as a force, one whose presence altered the equation before the mission even began. Her disappearance after whispering the call sign was not a simple exit. It was an extension of the very skill that had earned her legendary status. In the world of special ops, vanishing was not just a matter of stepping behind a corner or ducking into a shadow. It was a choreography of anticipation, timing, and psychological manipulation. She didn't just leave the room, she erased herself from the perception of those around her, exploiting every detail of the environment, every expectation of human behavior, and every flaw in surveillance procedures to become invisible in plain sight. The operators who had asked for her call sign were still processing the weight of what they had heard when the realization struck them. She was gone. Not simply absent, not hiding somewhere obvious, but truly gone. Chairs were left slightly ajar, boots left scuffed where she had stood, and the faint echo of her whisper lingered in the air, but the woman herself had disappeared. In elite military circles, where situational awareness is drilled into every operative until it becomes instinct, this kind of disappearance was unnerving. It was a demonstration of mastery that went beyond skill. It was psychological dominance. Her movements were silent, but not accidental. Every step she had taken before speaking had been calculated to leave minimal trace, to prevent reflexive pursuit, and to manipulate the instincts of those trained to track threats. She knew how long it would take for them to realize she had moved, how their eyes would scan the room in the wrong direction, and how their minds would attempt to rationalize her absence. By the time they oriented themselves, she was already several steps ahead, out of sight, out of reach, and fully in control of the situation. This vanishing act also served a deeper purpose. In special ops, control of perception is as important as control of territory. By disappearing immediately after revealing her identity, she left the team with both awe and uncertainty. They were left with the knowledge of her legend, but without the ability to predict her actions or constrain her movements. This imbalance of information created a subtle but profound power dynamic. She was no longer a participant subject to oversight. She was the variable that could not be calculated.
Even her absence sent messages. It communicated that she operated on a level above protocol and hierarchy, that her missions were self-contained, and that her presence alone could alter outcomes without interference. It demonstrated that her effectiveness depended not on force, but on the art of strategic invisibility, the manipulation of attention, and the careful orchestration of perception. By the time Special Ops fully realized she had vanished, the room felt different, smaller, quieter, and less certain. Every operator instinctively reassessed their assumptions about control, capability, and risk. They had glimpsed the edge of a force that did not conform to their understanding, and the lingering echo of her call sign reminded them that this was only the beginning. The Dark Angel had made her mark, and the lesson was clear. Presence is not defined by visibility, and power is not measured by proximity. She had disappeared, but in doing so, she left an indelible impression that would shape every mission, every decision, and every expectation that followed. What set her apart wasn't just her skill or her stealth, it was the way she defied every expectation placed upon her simply because of who she was. In a world dominated by men trained to measure strength in muscle, aggression, and rank, she operated on a different wavelength entirely. She was calm where others were tense, precise where others were reckless, and thoughtful where others acted on impulse. Her presence challenged assumptions, not through argument, but through undeniable competence. Those around her quickly realized that underestimating her was not just foolish, it was dangerous.
Her reputation as a female operative in a male-dominated environment was not built on defiance alone, but on results. Every mission she touched bore the signature of excellence, clean execution, minimal collateral, and outcomes that often seemed almost impossible from an outside perspective. Unlike the typical lone wolf archetype that relied on brute force or notoriety, she relied on intelligence, observation, and subtlety. She anticipated moves before they were made, read intentions before they were spoken, and adapted faster than any protocol could account for. This made her unpredictable, and unpredictability in special ops is a weapon as lethal as any firearm. She also embodied a rare form of psychological dominance. Her calm presence in high-pressure environments caused others to second-guess themselves, to slow down, to hesitate just long enough to create openings. It wasn't manipulation in a cruel sense, but a natural extension of her mastery. Commanders who had seen entire operations unfold flawlessly would later admit that the way she moved and acted subtly dictated the tempo of missions. Her authority didn't need titles or ranks. It was inherent in every decision, every glance, and every measured action. Her role as a female alpha didn't mean she sought attention or credit. In fact, she deliberately avoided it. Recognition was irrelevant because her priority was impact, not applause. The effect she had on those around her came from competence so complete that it left no doubt for doubt. Men and women alike found themselves adjusting their expectations, aligning with her strategy even without explicit instruction. Her gender, far from being a limitation, became a layer of advantage in scenarios where others underestimated her or assumed she would conform to traditional norms. She used that assumption as a tool, turning prejudice into opportunity, bias into leverage. Moreover, her presence reinforced a critical truth. Leadership and dominance are not defined by size, rank, or gender, but by the ability to act decisively under uncertainty and to inspire confidence without speaking it aloud. In every operation she engaged in, she set a standard that others aspired to, but rarely matched. Her effectiveness forced a rethinking of assumptions about capability and power within elite forces, leaving a legacy not only of completed missions, but of transformed perceptions. By the time anyone fully grasped her impact, it was too late to categorize her or contain her. She moved through the world on her own terms, lethal yet unseen, decisive yet unassuming. She was the embodiment of the female alpha operative, a figure whose presence alone reshaped dynamics, commanded respect, and reminded everyone around her that true power is not defined by who expects it, but by who possesses it, and she possessed it.